Okay, now as most of you know, outside of making synth videos, I've been hard at work on finishing the production and composition of my third full-length Miles Away EP, and this time I got the opportunity to work with a real string quartet for the final climactic song. Richness in tone, the expression in each note, it all just made me realize that as much as I love synthesizers, they still have a long way to go to truly match the expressivity and emotion of real acoustic instruments. Except, what if I told you that every single string quartet part you just heard was actually synthesized and there was no samples, instruments, or real players used anywhere? Whether or not you saw that twist coming, a disclaimer before we go any further is that just like real acoustic instruments, the synthesized instruments you're going to hear in this video each have their own unique way of playing that requires significant practice. An expert player could get the realism significantly closer. That's right, there was not a single real acoustic stringed instrument anywhere on that demo. Every single sound you heard was actually synthesized in a VST by audio modeling called SWAM, using a technique called Physical Modeling Synthesis. Alright, so this is a video I've been wanting to make for a long time, and I've known about physical modeling synthesis for ages, but back when I used to use it, it was a lot less powerful than it is today. For example, almost nobody would believe that this is actually a jazz trio playing a rendition of Autumn Leaves, although I must confess I kind of like the way it sounds. But even if that wasn't the most accurate representation of a guitar, bass, and keys you've ever heard, there's something really interesting about this method of synthesis, because it uses the idea of physics and how materials actually would interact in the real world to create sounds. In previous videos, I've talked about the strengths and weaknesses of synthesizers versus traditional acoustic instruments, and at the very top of the weaknesses list is the fact that synthesizers are not nearly as expressive as real acoustic instruments. For example, this MPE-controlled jam on my Oberheim synthesizer, while it sounds awesome, is frankly very limited in the amount of parameters we can modulate. We've got our pitch, which is great, our filter, our volume, maybe an LFO or two, but that's pretty much it. In comparison, if we look at this violin, there are so many tiny little physical nuances that will drastically affect the way that the instrument sounds every single time we play it. Sorry in advance, I'm not a violinist, this might hurt your ears. As I bow, countless tiny little physics-based variables drastically alter the sound, like how even the rosin application on the bow is, how consistent my speed and pressure is, how close to the bridge I play. I could go on and on. These little imperfections and countless variables are why we love acoustic instruments and why they will never go out of vogue. Take, for example, even just the sound of me walking on this grass. Every single footstep is slightly different because of all of the different variables and interactions. In just a minute, we'll head back to the studio and you can decide for yourself if you truly think that physical modeling at the highest level with these audio modeling SWAM instruments really can replace a real acoustic instrument. But first, I think it would be helpful to understand how physical modeling works at its most basic level. Okay, so at its simplest level, physical modeling synthesis involves synthesizing an exciter, think like a pick or a bow, and a resonator, the string or whatever thing you're going to resonate with the exciter that you've created. The Karplus-Strong algorithm is the perfect way to explain physical modeling synthesis in its most basic form. Karplus-Strong synthesis involves creating an exciter using a short white noise burst to represent an object plucking a string. Then we are going to send that white noise burst into a resonating feedback loop of a delay, simulating a string vibrating after being picked. Some randomness in the exciter and filtering in the delay line will better help simulate the physical properties of our physical model. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry, here's an example of how to do it. All right, so to quickly create a Karplus-Strong algorithm here, we're gonna go into Serum and we are gonna turn off our main oscillator, turn on our noise, And like I mentioned, to simulate the imperfections of an actual pick, we're going to go ahead and grab some randomness with each note press, go into our noise oscillator, go to pitch. We're then going to turn this into a really short burst. So then we're going to go into the delay here and send our noise burst through a delay. We only really need one delay, so I'll just link these two, and I will unlink it from BPM and turn the mix up, turn the feedback way up, and now we have our feedback circuit. Just sounds like a regular delay, but as we turn down the time, we start to hear the sound of a string being plucked because of the feedback loop that's created by the white noise hitting the delay line. So let's turn up the feedback even more. It's going to ring out forever. So this is where, like I mentioned, we bring in filtering to simulate the sound of a string. All you need to do from here is to basically modulate the time to create different notes. So let's go ahead and do that quickly. So we are going to modulate the time with the note number. All right, we'll probably have to change that. Yeah, that's crazy. And there we go, we've got our beautiful sounding, very out of tune guitar. So as you can see from all the work that went into creating just that basic rudimentary physical modeling guitar that doesn't even sound like a guitar or play in tune, the sound quality and realism being achieved in real time by these audio modeling SWAM instruments is truly something to behold. So let's dive in and make some music with physical modeling synthesizers using the SWAM collection. Okay, before we dive in and get started, one really important thing I want to mention is that since filming this video, SWAM instruments have been updated to version 3.8, which adds a whole bunch of new things. Most importantly, you can now use the same room feature for the solo instruments as the sections. I'll explain that more later when we get to the room feature part, but I wanted to make it clear that there's a new version out and it sounds awesome. All right, here I am on the front panel of one of the many amazing SWAM instruments. And the first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and select one of our keyboard presets. So you can use these instruments with a totally standard keyboard, but what we'll do is pick the C-board default because I'm playing a rolly C-board. Like I alluded to in the intro, the biggest challenge of physical modeling emulations is that we are used to hearing how their acoustic instrument counterparts sound. For example, with this violin, if I do vibrato by moving my fingers side to side, it sounds pretty good because it simulates what would actually happen, the string bending. However, if I try to do the same thing on this flute, it sounds totally off, and you might not be able to tell why, but it doesn't sound realistic. That's because every single acoustic instrument has a different technique for how to play it, and we have to kind of learn the same techniques when performing with these SWAM physical modeling instruments. For our flute example, the vibrato will sound much more realistic if we do it with the expression parameter. We can also move up the C-board to get a different tone that is going to be closer to the bridge of the violin. Cello, sorry. Right here, you're seeing the absolute power of physical modeling because with a sample, we wouldn't be able to change any of this stuff. The amount of vibrato that was recorded would be fixed. Similarly, we wouldn't be able to change where on the neck it was played. Similarly, we would not be able to change things like the timbre of the different violins. Sordino, meaning a mute. These would all have to be brand new samples that were re-recorded, which is why some sample libraries are upwards of 400, 500 gigabytes. We even have control over how much resin we have on our bow, if you remember my example earlier. So with nothing, it's very, very weak and kind of airy, and with full resin, it's It's a much richer and more powerful sound. There's also really cool different play modes. You can mess with the fingering. We can make it play harmonics. Like, I mean, come on, that is wild that that is being synthesized in real time with almost no latency. Beautiful. Let's mess with the right hand here. I really like just the standard bowing, but there's also pizzicato, which is physically modeled, probably using something similar to the Karplus-Strong algorithm we looked at before, only of course, way more technically complex. And col legno. One of my favorite things about MPE controllers controlling physical modeling instruments like these SWAM instruments is the idea that we get away from piano-based keyboards having to just be note on and note off. The best way to show this is with some of these other gesture modes. So for example, bowing is very, very cool. What we can do is we press down and we let go and it bows. So what that allows us to do is some really, really interesting, fast articulations. Let's open up another instrument here and we're going to start to track a composition that I'm going to write right now. So I've got the double bass section here, which is one of the newer instruments. And you'll notice right away that one of the main differences with this type of instrument, the section, is that there's actually a room as well as a difference of how many players we have. And this is just so cool because basically it's using physical modeling to simulate multiple players playing the same part with little imperfections. It's that natural acoustic chorusing of, in this case, 5 double basses. And at the same time, we talked about a room. What's a good orchestra if not for the auditorium it performs within? So they've actually modeled the different rooms and all the different absorption materials, then the distance, the placement, really, really cool stuff. Let's change our mic position. Let's make it closer. I'll have my basses pretty front and center. Alright, editor Devin here. Like I mentioned, since filming this video, SWAM instruments have been updated to version 3.8, which adds that amazing room feature from the sections to the solo instruments as well. This is huge and worth mentioning because now it allows us to put all our instruments in that same amazing virtual space. So for example, if we take a violin, can send it all the way to the back, to the left, right in the center. It's a seriously great feature and I wanted to make a note of it. So now let's get back to writing our song. Let's go ahead, we'll change the BPM to 80 and let's record something in. So I'm adding in a new instrument here to pair with our double bass. I've loaded up a SWAM French horn and it sounds like this. Beautiful. And of course we get a whole bunch of different parameters. I'm not going to go through all of them right now because I want to compose, but it's just so powerful. This time I've loaded up a cello, again, a section, and it's come up with this really nifty warning that I haven't seen before, which is that I've overlapped my sections. So for realism, we're gonna actually place the cellos somewhere else in the room. Next up, the violins, and you'll notice I'm not really spending any time tweaking the presets. We can always do that later, and honestly, I'm really liking how they're just sounding right out of the box. Okay, last string section here, we're gonna do the violas. Again, we've got this warning of overlapping, which I really like, it's really cool, and we'll throw this again somewhere further away. All right, I'm really liking how that's sounding. Let's grab one more part from Swam, and this time we'll try a solo woodwind, which we haven't tried yet. All right, so I've got the flute loaded up here. You can do this really cool flutter with it. All right, I'm gonna stop it there, but hopefully that short demo gave you an idea of just how powerful these audio modeling SWAM instruments are and how realistic they sound. A caveat I will make is that just like a real violin or French horn or flute, these instruments require a lot of practice to play realistically, but if you take the time to learn how to play them so that they replicate real instruments, you're gonna get a level of realism and control that frankly just isn't possible in my opinion with samples. But what if we don't just want to emulate classic acoustic instruments and we want to use these in more contemporary, modern productions? Well, here I've taken one of the cello parts from the intro and I've done some manipulation and processing with some of my favorite plugins, put it over a modern electronic beat, and check out what we're left with. An amazingly expressive synth lead that sounds like nothing else I've heard. right, well, hopefully you enjoyed that. Before we jump to my thoughts and the outro, let's wrap things up with a piece of music that uses both Audio Modeling's Physical Modeling SWAM collection, as well as traditional samples. Let me know if you can tell the difference, tell which one is which, and if you think they work well together. All right, I'm back from my walk, and of course now is when the sun decides to come out. Isn't that how it always goes? But anyways, let's wrap up this video with a discussion about the future. So to go back to the question at the beginning of my video, is physical modeling really the future of synthesis? And if so, what does that future hold? To start with, in the world of acoustic instrument emulation, I think we're already there. I'm blown away by how good Audio Modeling SWAM collection sounds and how close, if not spot on, it can emulate a real acoustic instrument. I think any differences that you're hearing between a real violin or a real horn and what Audio Modeling are able to achieve honestly comes down to user error, in this case me. I think in the hands of a skilled performer, you could replace every single stringed, woodwind, or reed instrument in the mix with SWAM collection Audio Modeling instruments, and the average listener wouldn't be able to tell the difference. However, when it comes to the world of synthesizers and sound design away from acoustic emulations, that's where things get a little bit more complicated with physical modeling. Now, physical modeling synthesizers, by their very nature, are extremely unapproachable and pretty complex. If you remember my review of the Osmos, one of my gripes was that you couldn't actually edit sounds, and in order to import your own sounds, you had to download the Egan Matrix, which has to be one of the most terrifying VST synthesizers I've ever looked at. Where am I going with this? Well, what I'd truly like to see for the future, and I hope that somebody with the pedigree and skill of audio modeling does this, is a synthesizer that has the approachability and usability of a subtractive synth, but with the power and sound of a physical modeling synthesizer. But I don't know how realistic that would be. I'm sure the UI alone would be an absolute nightmare to create. So until then, I will be happy sticking to my amazing physical modeling emulations of real life instruments like the Audio Modeling SWAM. If you like what you heard and you want to learn more about Audio Modeling SWAM instruments or pick up the collection for yourself, you can click the link in the description and check it out on their site. Thank you so much to those guys for sending over their instruments to be a part of this educational video on physical modeling. I truly think they sound phenomenal. They're the top of the market as far as I'm concerned for physical modeling, and I wouldn't be featuring them on this channel if I didn't think so. But that's all for me today. Thank you so much for watching. If you're still here, remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.